What does breastfeeding, a science experiment, and greed all have in common? The Fultz quadruplets. Today I am going to discuss the first Black quadruplets on record and how exploitation and greed played a role in their tragic story. Trust me, this is a story that you do not want to miss, and it will blow your mind. Stay tuned. Hi, my name is Tammy and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to discuss the Fultz quadruplets, the first set of Black quadruplets on record. But before I take it there, let's go back in time just a little bit. So the 1940s was a very trying time in America. It was the era after the Great Depression, the era of World War II, and the beginning of an era what is known as the baby boomers, which consists of any person born between the years of 1946 to 1964. Now, although the 1940s began the baby booming era, quadruplets were and is extremely rare, occurring only 1 in 700,000 pregnancies. But lo and behold, on May 23rd, 1946, in Reedsville, North Carolina, James Pete Fultz Jr. and Annie Mae Fultz gave birth to the first set of Black quadruplets on record. The sisters were born at Cone Health Annie Penn Hospital in a segregated wing known as the basement, which was considered the blacks' only wing at that time. They were all delivered prematurely at 3 pounds each, and the delivery was accomplished by Dr. Fred Klenner and a black nurse named Margaret Ware. Now, this was not only a phenomenon, but a miracle. Because with multiple birth pregnancies, especially during this time, either all the babies didn't make it to full term or there were severe complications. These kinds of pregnancies were also very risky for the mother giving birth as well. The types of risks and complications that come with multiple birth pregnancies occur today, even with modern technology. So I can only imagine how very rare and extraordinary it was for a Black mother and a family to have a successful birth to a set of quadruplets. And also at this time, the hospital did not have incubators. So the babies were wrapped in cotton gauze blankets and placed close to one another for warmth. So this was fascinating and unheard of. And to make things even more complicated, the father of the quadruplets was a sharecropper on a farm in which their family lived, and their mother was mute and deaf due to a childhood illness. And on top of that, the Fultz family had already had 6 other children. So just to put this all into perspective, this was a poor Black family in the 1940s who already had 6 other children to feed along with themselves, who now had given birth to 4 more babies, 4 little girls, all at one time. So this was a beautiful and sweet victory, but I'm sure a very scary and overwhelming victory as well. So with this much adversity and 4 newborns to take care of, the Fultz family needed help and fast. So this is where Dr. Klenner saw an opportunity, or should I say a golden ticket to wealth. Pete and Annie Mae, the parents of the quadruplets, could not read or write. So Dr. Klenner began inserting himself into the lives and development of the quadruplets. He first began taking control by naming them. He named them all Mary and gave them each a middle name from someone in his family. So they were named Mary Louise, Mary Ann, Mary Alice, and Mary Catherine. He began experimenting on the infants by giving them high doses of vitamin C with the help of a nurse named Elma Saylor, who was also helping with aiding the quadruplets and helping with their basic necessities. So of course, with something as grand and as big as this, and there was a lot of buzz and excitement around the quads. Not only were they quadruplets, they were Black quadruplets, and this had never been on a record before. So people were fascinated with seeing 4 Black babies with essentially the same face. It was really unbelievable and gained national media attention. So of course, Dr. Klenner capitalized off the growing interest of the quads and even created a schedule where people could come and visit the quads, where they could view them through a glass enclosed nursery where they were placed on display. The visiting hours were between 2 and 4 p.m., so these children became like a tourist attraction. So this created even more excitement, so Dr. Klenner saw money signs. He saw an opportunity to monetize, and his desire for greed and fame took over even more as he began negotiating deals with milk formula companies. Now, it was reported that he turned down deals from 2 other companies before agreeing to a deal with Pet Milk. Pet Inc. was an American company that was the first to commercially produce evaporated milk as a shelf-stable consumer product with its Pet Milk brand. So Klenner signed a baby formula endorsement deal with Pet Milk on the Fultz behalf, and Pet Milk launched a campaign that convinced Black mothers that their formula was better than breast milk and made record-breaking profits. Pet Milk targeted the Fultz sisters to help bring in Black urban consumers. During the 1940s, Black mothers were breastfeeding their babies, and Black communities did not buy formula because it was too expensive. Pet Milk wanted this particular community because this had been a group that they had not been able to reach. And of course, reaching Black mothers meant more money for them. Pet Milk wanted to reach the African American market. So with this deal, they took the children off of breast milk and required them to be fed their product instead. They then released ads and campaigns showcasing the children. And if you're a Black mother during this time and you're seeing and hearing how beautiful and healthy these children are because they are on this milk formula product, of course you're going to be easily persuaded, especially coming from an underprivileged community. The famous fultzquads campaign opened the door to misleading, race-targeted marketing that claimed formula was the same or better than breastfeeding. This marketing contributed to the wealth of structural, legal, political, and social factors that make breastfeeding more difficult for Black women. The resulting racial gap in breastfeeding rates is having a particularly devastating impact now. The history of Black women and breastfeeding runs deep. Throughout the years of slavery, Black women were not allowed to give their children breast milk because they were giving their breast milk to their slave masters' children. So then throughout the decades, there were really no images, no positive images or idea of Black women breastfeeding. Magazines such as the National Geographic portrayed breastfeeding Black women as exotic and savage. Popular media reflected wide disparities in breastfeeding between white and Black mothers. Black women were portrayed as cold and incompetent mothers, which furthered the stereotype that Black women don't breastfeed. So when Pet Milk marketed the fultzquadruplets campaigns showcasing that their product is healthier and better than breast milk, this was not only wrong and misleading, but it also aided a stereotype and generational curse that is still very present to this day in the Black community. Just look at when the pandemic happened and there was a shortage of formula. A lot of Black women were in a state of panic because a lot of Black women don't breastfeed and they are dependent upon milk formula. So what were the fultzquadruplets promised in this deal? Pet reportedly offered to pay all medical bills associated with the girl's birth, hire an in-home nurse, provide the girls with their own farmland, provide a house for the family, and pay $350 per month for their care. So the way the deal was written up, it was perceived that the girls would have a big nice house, farmland to grow food and thrive, that they would pretty much be taken care of from here on out. So to a poor Black family, this sounds like a dream, like a come up, right? It was portrayed that Dr. Klenner saw this poor family in need and really wanted to help them. Not only did he want to deliver them, but he made sure that they were taken care of and had sustainability. And he even garnered them an endorsement deal where they would be the spokespersons of said campaigns. The Pet Milk campaign. He literally made them into celebrities overnight and birthed them into fame and fortune. And now if this wasn't enough, due to all the publicity from birth, when the girls grew older, they were sought after even more. People wanted to feature them and wanted them to make appearances. In November 1959, when the girls were 13, they performed as a string quartet in the annual Orange Blossom Festival in Miami, Florida. They also appeared in magazines such as Ebony. They first appeared in Ebony magazine at age 1. The Fultz sisters were so popular that at one point they were in an ad that offered an autographed picture of the sisters. The sisters appeared on television shows and met presidents and celebrities such as John F. Kennedy, Harry Truman, and Althea Gibson. So like I said, they were living the life, right? So that is how it was supposed to look from the outside. That is how it was supposed to be perceived, that these twins were well taken care of and that they were living the life and that they had nothing to worry about. Well, the real story is that the quadruplets were given a home and farmland, but according to Elma Saylor, the nurse that had been taking care of them, she stated that the house was an old 4-room place in which 13 to 14 people, including herself as the baby's nurse, had to live. Pet milk put in a faucet and electricity and a gas hot plate for cooking, and they closed in the front porch so that she'd have a place to sleep. That was, I guess you call it, the nurse's quarters, she stated. The girls were given $350 a month, but the salary for their nurse also came out of that amount. So even now and back then, it was hard enough to take care of one baby, let alone 4. So whatever was left over from that $350 after expenses was pretty much scraps. And it was just enough money to keep them off of welfare during that time. And yes, they were given farmland, but the farmland that they were placed on was pretty much dead. And a hilly land, so no crops could be grown. As it was reported, this deal was misleading and inaccurate, and gave them nowhere near the wealth that they were promised, and the generational wealth that they should have had for this company and doctor using them and making a fortune off of them. They were given nowhere near what the Dion quintuplets from Canada were given, who were known as the $1 Million Babies due to their $1 Million trust fund at the age of 7. The Dion quintuplets from Canada were the first quintuplets to survive infancy, and unfortunately their story is also tragic too, with people also taking advantage of them. And if you want me to do a story on them, let me know in the comments. And I also read somewhere that the fultzquads, their income was cut shortly after they signed the deal, so they were not living nowhere near as fruitful as they were promised. Elma Saylor, the nurse, she knew the real truth and spoke out on this from time to time. She also stated in an interview, quote, "I'm not saying that Pet didn't do everything it promised to do. I'm just saying they could have done more." Now, a big red flag for me when the quadruplets were given this supposed deal and this better life is that their mother and their father and their family were still in poverty, which in my opinion is further proof that this company and Dr. Klenner did not have the girls' best interest, because if they did, they would have really cared about the long-term care of these girls. They would have made it to where their mother and their father could have also gotten the aid that they needed, or at least the mother. These were their children. These were their mother's children. And little children need their mothers and their fathers, and little girls especially need their mothers. Children bond with their mothers at birth, so just to cut them off from breastfeeding and to separate them from their parents and to turn them into some kind of experiment where money was made off of them is a tragedy within a tragedy. Now, I do understand that being in the 1940s and being poor, their father being a sharecropper, their mother being mute and deaf, they probably had limited choices. They probably felt like they had no choice but to relinquish their control over their children to Dr. Klenner. But with that being said, as for Dr. Klenner, morally, you still should do the right thing. Unfortunately, throughout history, Black people have been experimented on from a medical standpoint, even to a psychological standpoint. And unfortunately, in this case, these quadruplets did not get any reparations or compensation for what happened to them. They were used as experiments and exploited, and as a vehicle for misleading an entire community. And another thing that was real eerie and inhumane to me is that he named them all Mary. He didn't really care to individualize them or see them as individual people or give them a sense of their own personal identity. Something that we as humans all need psychologically. It just appeared to me like these were, instead of children, they were test subjects. And it was just really weird to me how he named them all the same name and giving them a middle name of someone from his family versus allowing the mother and the father to name them. Now, although they could not read and write, he still could have given them the honor of at least naming their children. But of course, this was during a particular time in history where unfortunately Black people, especially poor Black people, were taken advantage of. Now, pet milk had been in business since the 1920s, but the sales soared when pet milk took advantage of the post-war baby boom and promoted the Fultz sisters, making 1950 the all-time high sales year for pet evaporated milk. It was said that pet milk made more money in a particular year after promoting the Fultz quadruplets than they made in all the years they had been in business combined. Now you have to remember that this was a time during the baby boomers and post-war where people had been putting off making a family because of the war and the Great Depression. So after the war, the late 1940s and the 1950s saw increases in wages, thriving businesses, and an increase in the variety and quantity of products for consumers. Accompanying this new economic prosperity was a migration of young families from the cities to the suburbs. The GI Bill allowed many returning veterans, though not Black people, to buy affordable homes and tracts around the edges of the cities. So this is where you see a lot of white Americans moving to the suburbs and using things like credit to buy houses, and the ideal family consisted of a husband as a provider and the wife as a stay-at-home mom or housekeeper. And it was said that during this time that there was a state of homogeneity, the quality or state of being all the same or all of the same kind. That's why in the 50s you see a lot of houses were built identically. It was the era of keeping up with the Joneses. If you get a house, then I want a house. If your family has 2 kids, guess what? I'm gonna have 2 kids. People also felt the need to make and grow families. I also created a video about the 1950s and the 1950s economic structure, and I will link that video in the description. All in all, it was reported that during the boom, 76 million babies were born in the United States alone. So from here, how did the Fultz quadruplets grow up and what was the aftermath? Music was a large part of the Fultz sisters' lives. They went to Bethune-Cookman University to study music. They were accepted into the college as one unit and received a 4-year scholarship to attend there. While in college, the sisters were inseparable. Quote, "We used to play dirty tricks on the guys," said Griffin. "We'd play dirty tricks on the teachers too. But from having medical problems to skipping classes, their grades dropped drastically low. They attended the university for at least 2 years until the school asked their parents to remove them." Now, when it says parents, I'm assuming that it's not talking about their biological mother and father, but parents meaning Elma Saylor and her husband Charles, who later adopted the quadruplets and later moved them to Yanceyville, and their travels became more frequent. They flew to Chicago at the invitation of Ebony publisher Johnny Johnson. He featured them on his cover 4 times. They appeared in the Chicago star-studded Bud Billiken Parade, went on TV with Roy Rogers and Texas Pete, and would go on to appear in many more ads and make TV appearances. It was also reported that after 2 years of college, that the 4 headed to New York to attend modeling school, appearing in commercials for Virginia Slim cigarettes and for cosmetics. The forced withdrawal from school, according to their nurse Elma Saylor, eventually put the girls in a state of depression for a long time. They eventually returned home to live with Elma Saylor and her husband. The Fultz sisters still tried to maintain some sort of fame and decided to go into show business. They developed an amateur band at 22 years old and tried working in nightclubs. Among all of the 4 sisters, they learned to play the piano, guitar, viola, drums, cello, violin, and organ. As a group, they were able to harmonize together, but each sister had different musical talents. Later, they all became nurses, aides, following in the footsteps of their longtime caretaker, Elma Saylor. Eventually, and although all four married and went their separate ways, one to New York, one to Greensboro, and one to South Carolina, they still remained close. So as of today, none of the Fultz quadruplets are alive. Mary Louise died in 1991 at the age of 45. Mary Ann died in 1995 at age 49. Mary Alice died in 2001 at age 55. And those three all passed from breast cancer. And Mary Catherine, also known as Mary Catherine Fultz Griffin, the only surviving sister for a little while, had moved back to her hometown of Reidsville, North Carolina in 1992, and she stated that it was hard watching her sisters and her best friends pass away. We were really close, she said. We had spats, but we loved each other. Mary Catherine passed away in 2018 at the age of 72, and although she too had breast cancer at one point, she did beat it. But it was reported that she died from another form of cancer, but I also read somewhere that the cause of her death was unknown to the public. But it was reported that before Mary Catherine passed, that she believed that the cancerous disease was caused from the shot that her and her sisters had received when they were infants in the hospital. In conclusion, I am so sorry to hear about what happened to these four sisters and how their story played out. And I hope while they were here that they were able to cherish some good times and happy moments and find peace despite their series of unfortunate events. I feel like this story exists in part to bring awareness to breastfeeding and other disparities, especially as it pertains to Black mothers. I feel like a lot of these stories are so hidden and buried. Before a couple of months ago, I had no idea the story existed. I had no idea that these quadruplets had ever existed. And even with the research, with the information that I was able to find, there was still not a lot of information about them. It was information about how they were born and the early stages of their life. Then there's a big gap, and then there's the end. So if you all come across any more information about these quadruplets, let me know and I'll do a follow-up video. One of the reasons that my channel has a segment that focuses on history and time traveling is because there are so many unheard voices that never got to tell their story or get their just due. I believe it was Albert Einstein that stated, "If you want to know the future, just look at the past." And I say, if you want to understand the present and you want a better future, pay close attention to the past. So what do you all think about this story, and have you ever heard of it? And what do you all think about all four sisters ending up with breast cancer? Coincidence or not? Please leave your thoughts and comments in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching, and just like always, I'll see you in the next one.